Ren froze the moment she heard footsteps behind the storage shed. Her small fingers gripped her brother Ash's sleeve, pulling him deeper into the shadows between two stacked crates. If anyone found them here, so close to the edge of the packlands, everything would fall apart before it even had a chance to begin. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Ash held his breath. Through a gap in the wooden planks, they watched a pair of guards walk past, laughing about something unrelated, their boots crunching over the gravel path. Neither guard glanced toward the shed. After a few seconds, their voices faded into the distance, and the twins finally let out the breath they had been holding. "That was close," Ash said, wiping his palms on his trousers. "We need to be more careful. If Father finds out where we've been going, he'll lock us in the manor for a month." Ren nodded, though her heart was still racing. She was only 10 years old, but she already understood more about secrets and consequences than most pups her age. She and her twin brother had been sneaking away from the Blackthorn Pack grounds for almost 4 months now, slipping past guards and stable hands, crossing the old stone bridge that marked the border of their father's territory, just to spend an hour with a woman named Alira. Nobody else knew. Not their nanny, not the guards, and certainly not their father, Alpha King Damian Cross, ruler of the Blackthorn Pack and one of the most respected leaders in the region. If he ever discovered that his own children had been meeting a rogue wolf on unclaimed land, there would be no explaining it away. But to Ren and Ash, none of that mattered. What mattered was the warmth in Alira's eyes when she saw them arrive. What mattered was the way she always had something ready for them. A warm drink, a story, a soft blanket by the fire. What mattered was that somehow, without either of them fully understanding why, she felt like home in a way nothing else ever had. That morning, the entire Blackthorn territory was buzzing with a different kind of energy. Banners in deep red and gold had been strung along the main road leading to the pack hall. Servants moved briskly from house to house, carrying flowers, polishing silverware, and preparing rooms for guests who would soon arrive from neighboring packs. The reason for all this activity was simple, and every wolf in the territory already knew it by heart. Alpha King Damian Cross had finally announced his mating ceremony. For years, pack elders had pressured him to choose a mate, insisting that a kingdom needed a queen standing beside its king, someone to share the responsibilities of leadership and to secure the bloodline for future generations. Damian had resisted for a long time, citing duties, wars, and the demands of ruling a large territory. But recently, under mounting pressure from the Elder Council, he had relented and agreed to hold a formal ceremony where unmated she-wolves of noble packs could present themselves as potential partners. The news spread quickly. Within days, invitations had gone out to allied packs across the region. Families with unmated daughters prepared for weeks, arranging travel, selecting fine clothing, and rehearsing proper etiquette for meeting a king. Excitement rippled through every corner of Blackthorn territory, and whispers filled the market square about who might catch the Alpha King's attention. Ren and Ash heard about it too, of course. Everyone did. Their nanny, a kind but strict wolf named Agnes, had explained it to them plainly one evening while tucking them into bed. "Your father is going to choose a mate soon," Agnes had said, smoothing the blanket over Ren's shoulders. "A new mother figure for the pack, and perhaps for you two as well, in time." Ren had said nothing in response, staring up at the ceiling long after Agnes left the room. Ash, lying in the bed across from hers, had turned to look at her in the darkness. "They don't need to choose anyone," he had whispered. "We already know who we want." Neither of them said Alira's name out loud that night. They didn't need to. The understanding between them had been clear for weeks already, ever since the first afternoon they stumbled upon her small cottage near the border, while exploring farther than they were supposed to. She had been surprised to see 2 pups wandering so far from home, but instead of scolding them or sending them straight back, she had invited them in, fed them warm bread, and asked gentle questions about their lives. From that day on, they had found reasons to return. At first it was simple curiosity, then it became something deeper, something neither of them could fully explain even to each other. Alira never asked about their father directly, and they never offered much information either, as if some unspoken agreement kept certain topics carefully avoided. All they knew was that being near her felt different than anything else in their lives, calmer somehow, safer. Now, walking back through the forest path toward the manor, Ren glanced sideways at her brother. "Do you think Father will actually choose someone at the ceremony?" she asked. Ash kicked a loose stone along the dirt trail. "I don't know. The elders want him to. Everyone keeps talking about it like it's already decided. But what if he picks someone we don't like? What if she's mean to us?" Ash didn't answer right away. He had been thinking about the same thing for days, turning the worry over in his mind without finding any comfortable answer. Their father was a fair and strong leader, respected by nearly everyone in the territory, but he had also been distant with his own children in certain ways, especially when it came to matters of family and emotion. Since their mother had died when they were still infants, Damien had never spoken much about her, and the subject of love or partnership had always felt like something reserved for adults, far removed from anything the twins had a say in. "We could tell him," Ash finally said, "about Alira." Ren stopped walking. "Are you serious? He'd be furious. We've been sneaking off for months without telling anyone." "I know. But if he's really going to choose someone at that ceremony, maybe it should be someone we already care about. Maybe it should be her." The idea hung between them, both thrilling and terrifying. Neither of them fully understood the history behind their father's past, nor why he had waited so long to consider taking a mate again. All they knew was the quiet ache they felt at the idea of some stranger stepping into their lives and taking a place that already belonged, in their hearts, to someone else entirely. They reached the edge of the manor grounds just as the sun began sinking behind the hills, casting long, golden shadows across the courtyard. Servants were still hurrying about, carrying the last few decorations toward the great hall where the ceremony would eventually take place. Guards nodded politely as the twins passed, unaware of where they had actually spent their afternoon. Inside, Agnes was waiting for them near the kitchen entrance, her arms crossed and her expression tight with concern. "There you two are," she said, relief mixing with irritation in her voice. "Where have you been? Your father asked about you an hour ago." "We were just playing near the old bridge," Ash said smoothly, a skill he had practiced enough times by now to sound convincing. Agnes studied them both for a long moment, her sharp eyes lingering on the dirt smudged along Ren's sleeve and the slightly flushed color in both their cheeks from walking quickly. She said nothing further, though the suspicion in her gaze was impossible to miss. "Wash up before dinner," she said finally. "Your father wants you both at the table tonight. There are guests arriving soon for the ceremony preparations, and he wants the family presented properly." The twins exchanged a quick glance before heading toward the washroom. Dinner that evening felt tense in a way neither of them could easily explain to Agnes, even if she had asked. Damien sat at the head of the long table, dressed in formal attire suited to the arriving guests, his expression calm but distracted, clearly weighed down by the responsibilities piling onto his shoulders as the ceremony date approached. "How was your day?" he asked the twins, glancing between them with the kind of polite attentiveness that came more from duty than natural warmth. "Fine," Ren said simply, poking at the food on her plate. Damien didn't press further, his attention quickly pulled away by an advisor who approached the table with urgent matters regarding guest arrangements for the neighboring packs. Ren watched her father's face as he listened, noticing the tightness around his eyes, the subtle exhaustion hidden beneath his composed exterior. She wondered, not for the first time, whether he was truly excited about this ceremony, or whether he felt trapped by expectations placed upon him by people who didn't understand what he actually wanted. Later that night, lying in her bed and staring at the same ceiling she always stared at before falling asleep, Ren made a decision. She didn't know exactly how or when, but she knew that somehow, before this ceremony took place, she and Ash needed to find a way to bring Alira into their father's life, whether the rest of the pack approved or not. Because deep down, in a place too certain to argue with, both twins had already chosen their mother. The only person who didn't know it yet was their father. Outside, beyond the manor walls and past the old stone bridge, Alira sat alone by her fire, unaware of the storm quietly building around a ceremony that would soon change everything she thought she understood about her own carefully hidden life. Alira nearly dropped the kettle when she heard the knock at her door 3 days later, sharp and urgent, nothing like the light, familiar tap the twins usually gave when they arrived for their visits. Her heart jumped into her throat as she set the kettle aside and moved cautiously toward the entrance, one hand instinctively resting on the small blade she kept tucked near the doorway out of old habit. "Who is it?" she called out. "It's just us," came Ash's voice, slightly breathless. "Please let us in quickly." Alira exhaled and pulled the door open. Ren and Ash rushed inside, their faces flushed from running, and she immediately noticed the anxious energy radiating from both of them. "What happened?" she asked, closing the door behind them and kneeling down to their eye level. "Are you hurt?" "No. Nothing like that," Ren said, catching her breath. "It's Agnes, our nanny. She's been asking questions about where we go every afternoon. We think she might be starting to follow us." Alira's expression shifted, worry flickering behind her calm exterior. She had always known this arrangement carried risk, that eventually someone would notice the twins slipping away from the manor grounds so consistently, but she had allowed herself to enjoy their visits regardless, perhaps more than she should have. "You two need to be more careful," she said gently, guiding them toward the small table near the fireplace. If your father finds out you've been coming here without his knowledge, it could cause serious problems, not just for you, but for me as well. We know, Ash admitted, sitting down heavily in one of the wooden chairs. But we don't want to stop coming. We like it here. We like being with you. The simple honesty in his voice struck something deep inside Alira's chest, a feeling she had spent years trying to suppress and forget. She busied herself pouring warm tea for both children, using the small task as an excuse to compose her expression, before turning back to face them. I like having you here too, she said finally, more than you probably realize, but that doesn't change the fact that we need to think carefully about what happens next. Ren wrapped her hands around the warm cup, watching Alira closely. There was something in the woman's eyes whenever she spoke about the future, a kind of guarded sadness that neither twin fully understood but had noticed many times before. Can I ask you something? Ren said quietly. Alira nodded, settling into the chair across from them. Why do you live all the way out here, by yourself? You never really talk about your family, or where you came from. For a long moment, Alira said nothing. The fire crackled softly in the silence, casting flickering shadows along the wooden walls of the small cottage. She had avoided this conversation for months, deflecting gently whenever the twins asked personal questions, but something about the growing urgency of their situation made her feel that honesty, at least in part, was becoming unavoidable. I used to belong to a pack, she said slowly. A long time ago, but things happened that forced me to leave, and I've been living on my own ever since. What kind of things? Ash asked. Alira hesitated, her fingers tightening slightly around her own cup of tea. Complicated things. Things involving trust and people who weren't honest with each other. It's a long story, one I'm not entirely ready to share just yet. Maybe someday, when the time feels right. The twins exchanged a glance but didn't push further, sensing the weight behind her words even without understanding the full meaning. They had learned over the past few months that Alira carried some kind of private pain beneath her warm and gentle exterior, though neither of them could have guessed how directly connected that pain was to their own father. Well, whatever happened, Ren said firmly, we think you'd make a wonderful mother, better than any of the she-wolves coming to the ceremony. Alira's breath caught sharply at the word. The ceremony? Father's mating ceremony, Ash explained. Wolves from other packs are coming to try and become his mate. Everyone's excited about it, but we don't want any of them. We want you. For a moment, Alira sat completely still, processing the sudden weight of what the children were suggesting. She had heard whispers about the Blackthorn Pack's upcoming ceremony from travelers passing through the region, vague rumors about the Alpha King finally settling down after years of resistance, but she had deliberately avoided asking further questions, unwilling to dig too deeply into memories she had spent years trying to bury. Sweethearts, she said carefully, choosing her words with great caution, that's a very kind thing to say, but it's not something that simple. Your father is an Alpha King. He has responsibilities, traditions, expectations from his entire pack. Someone like me, living alone on the border with no pack of my own, wouldn't be considered an appropriate match, even if he wanted such a thing. But we don't care about traditions, Ren argued, her small voice firm with conviction. We care about being happy, and we're happy when we're with you. Alira felt her throat tighten with emotion she hadn't expected to surface so suddenly. She reached out and gently squeezed both of their hands resting on the table. I care about you both very much, she said softly, more than you probably know, but we need to be smart about this. If your nanny suspects something, and if your father eventually finds out about these visits, it needs to happen in a way that doesn't create chaos or danger for anyone involved. So you're not saying no? Ash asked hopefully. Alira managed a small, tired smile. I'm saying we need to be careful. That's all I can promise for now. The twins seemed satisfied enough with that answer, their earlier anxiety easing slightly as they settled into the familiar comfort of the cottage. For the next hour, they talked about lighter subjects, Ren describing a story she had been reading, Ash recounting a minor disagreement with one of the guard's children back at the manor. Alira listened with genuine interest, offering gentle advice and quiet laughter at appropriate moments, the tension from earlier gradually fading into the comfortable rhythm they had built together over months of secret visits. But even as she smiled and engaged with the children in front of her, part of Alira's mind remained elsewhere, drifting back toward memories she rarely allowed herself to revisit. The mention of an Alpha King preparing for a mating ceremony stirred something deep and painful, a wound she had assumed long healed until this very afternoon. She had once been engaged to a powerful Alpha herself, many years ago, before circumstances she still didn't fully understand tore that future away from her entirely. She had lost everything in the aftermath, her position, her pack, and according to what she'd been told at the time, her unborn children as well. Looking now at Ren and Ash, laughing together over some small joke at her table, a strange and uncomfortable thought began forming at the edges of her mind, one she quickly pushed away, refusing to entertain something so impossible. Surely, she told herself, it couldn't be. As the sun began lowering toward the horizon, Elira gently reminded the twins it was time to head back before they were missed. She walked them partway along the forest path, watching carefully to ensure no one observed their departure, before turning back toward her cottage alone. That night, sitting by her fire long after the twins had gone, Elira found herself unable to shake the uneasy feeling settling over her chest. She thought about Damien Cross, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in years, and wondered, despite every effort to resist the thought, whether fate had somehow brought her impossibly close to a life she believed she had lost forever. Meanwhile, back at the manor, Agnes stood quietly near the twins' bedroom door that evening, watching them prepare for sleep with a carefully neutral expression. She had noticed the dirt on their shoes again, the same worn path marks she had seen many times before. Tomorrow, she decided firmly, she would follow them herself and finally uncover exactly where they had been disappearing to every single day. Whatever she discovered, she suspected it would change everything. Agnes moved carefully through the trees, staying far enough behind the twins that they wouldn't notice her presence, yet close enough to keep them within sight. She had left the manor shortly after breakfast, telling the kitchen staff she needed fresh herbs from the eastern field, a simple excuse that no one questioned. In truth, she had been waiting all morning for Ren and Ash to slip away again, just as they had done nearly every day for months. The twins moved quickly and quietly, clearly practiced in their route, weaving between familiar trees and following a narrow dirt path that led steadily toward the border of Blackthorn territory. Agnes felt her suspicion deepen with every step. This was no innocent game of exploration. These children had a destination in mind, one they had clearly visited many times before. When the small stone cottage finally came into view at the edge of a quiet clearing, Agnes crouched behind a wide tree trunk, watching as the twins approached the door and knocked in a familiar rhythm. A woman opened the door almost immediately, her face lighting up with obvious warmth and affection as she welcomed the children inside. Agnes stared at the woman for a long moment, something oddly familiar tugging at the edges of her memory, though she couldn't immediately place why. She had lived within Blackthorn territory for many years, long enough to recognize most faces among allied packs, yet this woman was a stranger to her, someone clearly living outside any formal pack structure. Deciding she had seen enough for now, Agnes carefully backed away from her hiding spot and made her way back toward the manor, her mind racing with questions. She needed to speak with the Alpha King immediately, though she wasn't entirely certain how to explain what she had witnessed without causing unnecessary alarm. Elira, unaware she had been observed, spent the afternoon exactly as she had many times before, preparing a simple lunch for the twins while listening to their light chatter about recent happenings at the manor. Today, however, an underlying tension lingered beneath her usual warmth, the memories stirred by yesterday's conversation refusing to fully settle. "You seem quiet today," Ash observed, watching her carefully as she set plates on the table. "Just thinking," Elira replied, offering a small smile. "About the past, mostly." "The pack you used to belong to?" Ren asked. Elira nodded slowly. She had promised herself she wouldn't reveal too much, at least not yet. But something about the twins' persistent curiosity, combined with her own restless thoughts from the previous night, made her want to share at least a little more of her story. "I was engaged once," she began carefully, "to a wolf who eventually became an Alpha King. We were very much in love, planning a future together, expecting our first children." The twins listened intently, sensing the significance of what she was sharing. "What happened?" Ash asked softly. Elira's expression grew distant, her gaze fixed on some point beyond the cottage walls, lost somewhere in memories from many years ago. "There was a plot within the pack, orchestrated by someone we both trusted. I was accused of a betrayal I never committed, and before I could properly defend myself, arrangements were made to remove me from the territory entirely. I was told my children hadn't survived the ordeal, and I was sent far away, forced to start over completely alone." "That's terrible," Ren whispered, her small hand reaching across the table to rest on Elira's arm. "It was a long time ago," Elira said, forcing a small smile despite the heaviness still lingering in her chest. "I've made peace with it, mostly, though sometimes, memories resurface in unexpected ways." The twins remained quiet for a moment, processing the story, before Ash spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder what happened to him?" The Alpha King you were engaged to? Elira hesitated before answering. Sometimes, though I doubt our paths will ever cross again. It's been many years, and I imagine his life has moved forward in ways that leave little room for someone from his distant past. Neither twin pressed further, though both were quietly turning over similar thoughts, wondering privately whether the pieces of Elira's story might somehow connect to details about their own father they had never fully understood. Their mother, they had always been told, died shortly after they were born, though the specifics had always remained vague, discussed only briefly, and never in great detail. As the afternoon wore on, their conversation gradually shifted toward lighter topics, though an unspoken weight continued lingering beneath the surface for all three of them. Eventually, as the sun began its slow descent, the twins prepared to head back toward the manor, promising to return again soon. "Please be careful," Elira reminded them as they left. "I have a feeling that whatever secrets we're keeping won't stay hidden much longer." Her words proved more accurate than she realized. Back at the manor, Agnes had already requested an urgent meeting with Alpha King Damien Cross, waiting nervously in his private study as he finished reviewing documents related to the upcoming ceremony preparations. "You wish to speak with me?" Damien asked, setting aside his papers and studying Agnes's uneasy expression. "Yes, my Alpha," she said carefully. "It concerns your children. I followed them today, out of growing concern, and discovered they've been visiting a cottage near the eastern border. There's a woman living there, someone unfamiliar to me, and the twins appear to have formed quite a close relationship with her over recent months." Damien's expression shifted immediately, concern replacing his earlier calm demeanor. "A stranger, living alone near our border? Do you know anything about her identity?" "I don't, my Alpha, but given the current circumstances, with the ceremony approaching and outside packs traveling through our territory, I felt it necessary to bring this to your attention immediately." Damien rose from his desk, his instincts as both a father and a leader instantly alert. "Thank you for informing me, Agnes. I'll handle this personally. In the meantime, please say nothing to the children about this conversation. I don't want them altering their behavior before I have a chance to understand the full situation myself." Agnes nodded and quietly excused herself, leaving Damien alone with a growing sense of unease. He had always trusted his children's judgment to a reasonable degree, allowing them freedom to explore within safe boundaries, but the idea of them forming a secret relationship with an unknown wolf, especially one living outside any recognized pack structure, troubled him deeply. That evening at dinner, Damien watched his children more closely than usual, noticing small details he had perhaps overlooked before. The way they exchanged quiet glances during certain topics of conversation, their evasive answers whenever he asked generally about their day, the subtle relief in their expressions whenever attention shifted away from questions about their whereabouts. He said nothing directly, choosing instead to observe and gather more information before confronting them. Tomorrow, he decided, he would follow them himself, using his own instincts as an experienced tracker to uncover exactly where they had been disappearing to, and more importantly, who this mysterious woman truly was. As dinner concluded and the twins retreated to their room for the evening, Damien remained seated at the long table alone, staring absently at the flickering candlelight, while his mind wandered back toward memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Years ago, he had lost someone very dear to him under circumstances that still felt unresolved, a wound from his past that had shaped much of his reluctance toward taking a new mate, despite the mounting pressure from his elder council. He wondered, briefly and almost involuntarily, whether there was any possible connection between that painful chapter of his past and the strange situation now unfolding with his children. He quickly dismissed the thought as unlikely, reminding himself that such coincidences rarely occurred outside of old stories and legends. Yet something about the unease settling in his chest that evening refused to fully disappear, lingering quietly in the back of his mind as he finally retired for the night, unaware of just how close he truly stood to a truth that would soon change everything he believed about his past. The next morning, Damien rose before dawn, dressing in plain clothing rather than his usual formal attire, hoping to move through the territory without drawing attention. He informed his personal guard, Oliver Finch, of his plan, instructing him to keep a discreet distance and follow only if necessary. "Are you certain you don't want a full escort, my Alpha?" Oliver asked, concern evident in his tone. "If there's an unknown wolf near our border, it could pose a risk." "I need to handle this quietly first," Damien replied firmly. "If my children have formed some kind of attachment to this woman, I don't want to frighten anyone or create a scene before I understand the full situation." Oliver nodded reluctantly and stepped back, allowing Damien to proceed alone while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. Damien positioned himself near the edge of the manor grounds, waiting patiently in the shadows of the tree line until he spotted Ren and Ash slipping away from their morning lessons earlier than usual, moving with the same practiced quietness Agnes had described. He followed at a careful distance, staying downwind and using his experienced tracking skills to remain undetected. The twins moved swiftly along the familiar forest path, occasionally glancing around to check for anyone following, though Damien's skill as a seasoned tracker kept him safely out of their notice. As the small stone cottage came into view, Damien felt his chest tighten with a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. At least the destination appeared modest and unremarkable, nothing like the threatening scenario his mind had conjured overnight. Still, the mystery of who lived there, and why his children felt such a strong pull toward this place, remained entirely unresolved. He watched from behind a cluster of thick bushes as the twins knocked on the door, and moments later, it opened to reveal a woman whose appearance struck him with sudden, overwhelming force. For a moment, Damien couldn't move. His breath caught painfully in his throat, and his entire body went rigid with disbelief. The woman standing in the doorway, embracing his children with obvious warmth and familiarity, bore an uncanny resemblance to someone he had spent years trying desperately to forget, someone he had believed lost to him forever. It couldn't be her, he told himself firmly. It simply wasn't possible. Yet as she turned slightly, allowing sunlight to catch her features more clearly, every doubt in his mind crumbled away entirely. There was no mistaking those eyes, that gentle curve of her smile, the exact way she tilted her head while listening attentively to whatever Ash was excitedly telling her. It was Alira, the woman he had once loved with his entire being, the woman he had been told died years ago, taken from him through circumstances he had never fully understood, despite years of quiet searching for answers that never came. The woman whose loss had shaped so much of his reluctance toward ever taking another mate. She was alive, and somehow, impossibly, his own children had found their way into her life, without either of them realizing the connection between them. Damien stepped forward from his hiding place, his movements slow and deliberate, his mind still struggling to process the impossible reality unfolding before him. Ren noticed him first, her eyes widening with sudden alarm. "Father!" she gasped. Alira turned sharply at the sound of Ren's voice, and the moment her gaze landed on Damien standing at the edge of the clearing, her entire body went perfectly still. The color drained from her face as recognition washed over her features, disbelief and shock mirroring the exact emotions currently overwhelming him. "Damien," she whispered, barely audible. For a long, suspended moment, neither of them spoke, simply staring at each other across the short distance separating them. Years of painful separation, and unanswered questions hanging heavily in the silence between them. "You're alive," Damien finally managed, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "I was told you died. I searched for answers for months, and eventually I was forced to accept that you were truly gone." "I was told the same about our children," Alira replied, her voice trembling as she glanced toward Ren and Ash, who stood frozen between the two adults, clearly overwhelmed by the sudden intensity of the reunion unfolding in front of them. "I was told they didn't survive. I've mourned them for 10 years, believing I would never have the chance to know them." Damien's gaze shifted toward his children, understanding dawning slowly across his features. "These are our children, Ren and Ash." Alira nodded slowly, tears beginning to gather in her eyes as she looked between the twins and their father, the pieces of an impossible puzzle finally clicking into place after years of separate suffering. "They've been visiting me for months," she said. "I had no idea. They never mentioned your name, and I never suspected any connection, not until recently, when doubts began forming that I quickly dismissed as impossible." Ren looked between her parents, her young mind struggling to process the magnitude of what was happening. "Wait," she said slowly. "You two already knew each other, before us?" "We were engaged," Damien said quietly, his eyes never leaving Alira's face. "Many years ago, before either of you were born. I loved her more than anything, and I believed I lost both her and the two of you on the same terrible day." Ash's expression shifted from confusion to slow, dawning understanding. "So Alira really is our mother?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications neither adult was fully prepared to address. Damien took a step closer, studying Alira's face carefully, searching for any sign of the deception he had been told about years ago, though nothing in her expression suggested anything other than genuine shock and overwhelming emotion. "I need to understand what happened," he said finally. "Everything. From the very beginning. Because if you truly are who I believe you are, then everything I was told about your betrayal was a lie." Alira nodded slowly, wiping at the tears now falling freely down her cheeks. "I've wanted the truth to come out for 10 years, Damien. I just never imagined I'd have the chance to share it with you directly." The twins watched their parents with wide, uncertain eyes, sensing that whatever conversation needed to happen next would reshape their entire family in ways they couldn't yet fully understand. Behind them, hidden discreetly at the tree line, Oliver Finch watched the unfolding scene with quiet astonishment, already anticipating the storm this discovery would soon unleash across the entire Blackthorn territory. Because in mere days, the mating ceremony was set to proceed exactly as planned, with dignitaries from allied packs already beginning their journey toward Blackthorn lands, entirely unaware that the Alpha King's long-lost mate had just been found, standing quietly at the edge of his own territory all along. Damien paced restlessly across his private study, his mind still reeling from the events of the previous day. Alira had agreed to remain temporarily at a small guest house within Blackthorn territory, close enough for continued conversation, though she had insisted on maintaining some distance until matters could be properly sorted out. Now, standing before him, was Nathaniel Vale, senior member of the Elder Council, delivering news that only deepened Damien's growing frustration. "My Alpha," Nathaniel said carefully, "I understand there have been unexpected developments, but the ceremony arrangements cannot simply be cancelled at this late stage. Dignitaries from 3 allied packs are already traveling toward our territory. Canceling now would be seen as a grave insult, potentially damaging important alliances we've spent years cultivating." "I understand the political implications," Damien replied, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "But surely the Council can appreciate that circumstances have changed dramatically. My presumed deceased mate has returned, along with revelations suggesting a serious betrayal occurred within our own pack years ago. I do appreciate the significance of what you're describing," Nathaniel said, choosing his words carefully. "However, without concrete proof of this alleged betrayal, and without a public accounting of the situation, canceling the ceremony risks appearing as though you're simply avoiding your responsibilities as Alpha King. The Council would need time to properly investigate these claims before recommending any changes to our current plans." Damien's jaw tightened, understanding the difficult position he now found himself in. Nathaniel wasn't wrong. Making drastic changes without proper investigation could create instability within the pack, especially with so many important guests already committed to attending. Yet the idea of proceeding with a ceremony designed to select a new mate, while his true mate remained nearby, felt deeply wrong on every level. Later that afternoon he visited Alira at the guest house, finding her seated near a window, watching the twins play in the garden below with a soft, wistful expression. "The Council won't allow the ceremony to be cancelled," he said without preamble, settling into the chair across from her. "Not without proper investigation into what happened to you, and proof of the betrayal you've described." Alira nodded slowly, unsurprised by the news. "I expected as much. Political matters rarely move quickly, even when personal circumstances demand urgency. I don't want to proceed with this ceremony," Damien admitted, his voice quieter now. "Not while you're here. Not while there's a real possibility that we could rebuild what was stolen from us." "Damien," Alira said gently, though sadness colored her tone, "you have responsibilities to your pack that extend far beyond our personal feelings. If proceeding with the ceremony helps maintain stability and alliances, while the truth is properly investigated, then perhaps that's the wiser path for now." "You're suggesting I continue searching for a mate while you sit here waiting?" Damien asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "I'm suggesting we be practical," Alira replied. "I've lived without you for 10 years, Damien. I can be patient a little longer if it means avoiding unnecessary chaos for your pack and your position as Alpha King." Damien studied her closely, recognizing the same quiet strength and selflessness that had drawn him to her so many years ago. Yet something about her suggestion troubled him deeply, a fear that proceeding with tradition might somehow cost him the very thing he had only just recovered. "And what about the twins?" he asked. "They've already formed such a strong bond with you. How do we explain continuing with a ceremony meant to choose someone else when they've already chosen you as their mother?" Alira's expression softened as she glanced toward the window again, watching Ren and Ash laughing together as they chased each other around the garden. Children have a remarkable ability to sense truth, even when adults try to complicate things with logic and politics. Perhaps we simply need to trust that whatever happens, they'll understand eventually. Despite her calm reassurances, Damien could see the toll this situation was already taking on her, the careful composure masking deeper uncertainty and worry beneath the surface. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "I won't lose you again," he said firmly. "Whatever needs to happen, whatever proof needs to be gathered, I promise you we'll find our way back to each other properly, this time, permanently." Elira squeezed his hand in response, though the underlying fear in her eyes suggested she wasn't entirely convinced things would proceed as smoothly as he hoped. Over the following days, preparations for the ceremony continued at their previous urgent pace. Servants finished decorating the great hall with elaborate banners and flowers, while kitchen staff planned an extravagant feast to welcome the arriving dignitaries. Meanwhile, quietly and separately, Damien began his own private investigation, reaching out to trusted advisors and old contacts, hoping to uncover concrete evidence supporting Elira's account of events from 10 years earlier. The twins, meanwhile, found themselves caught in an uncomfortable limbo, thrilled to finally have open access to visit their newly discovered mother, yet deeply anxious about the looming ceremony that threatened to introduce an entirely different woman into their family's life instead. "It's not fair," Ren complained one evening, sitting beside Elira on a bench near the guest house. "Everyone knows you're our real mother now. Why does father still have to go through with choosing someone else?" "Sometimes," Elira said gently, brushing a strand of hair from Ren's face. "Grown-up situations are more complicated than they seem, even when the right answer feels obvious to everyone involved. Your father has responsibilities to his entire pack, not just to our family." "But we already told everyone the truth," Ash added, frustration evident in his young voice. "Doesn't that count for something?" Elira smiled sadly, understanding their frustration completely, even sharing much of it herself privately. "It counts for a great deal, sweetheart. Sometimes, though, the world needs a little more convincing before it's ready to accept even the most obvious truths." As the ceremony date drew closer, tension continued building steadily across Blackthorn territory, an uneasy anticipation settling over everyone involved, unaware of just how dramatically the upcoming event would soon unfold. The great hall shimmered with candlelight and polished silver as dignitaries from 3 allied packs settled into their seats, murmuring quietly among themselves while musicians played softly in the background. The evening marked the formal welcoming dinner ahead of the mating ceremony itself, an event designed to introduce Alpha King Damien Cross to the eligible she-wolves who had traveled from distant territories in hopes of becoming his chosen mate. Charlotte Byrne, daughter of a respected pack leader from the Northern Territories, sat near the head table, dressed in an elegant gown of deep emerald fabric, her posture perfect and her smile carefully practiced. Beside her sat Isabel Moore, representing another allied pack, equally poised and eager to make a favorable impression on the Alpha King throughout the evening's proceedings. Damien sat at the head table, his expression composed though his mind remained elsewhere entirely, thoughts drifting repeatedly toward Elira, who remained at the guest house that evening, deliberately absent from the formal proceedings to avoid unnecessary complications before the investigation into her past could be properly concluded. Ren and Ash, seated near their father as tradition required, picked quietly at their food, watching the parade of hopeful she-wolves with barely concealed discomfort. Neither twin had any interest in pretending enthusiasm for an event they fundamentally disagreed with, though they had promised Elira they would behave respectfully throughout the evening. As dinner progressed, Nathaniel Vale rose to address the gathered guests, formally welcoming everyone and outlining the schedule for the following days leading up to the official ceremony. Polite applause followed his brief speech, and conversation resumed around the hall as servants began clearing the first course. It was during this lull that Ren, unable to contain her frustration any longer, turned to Ash with quiet determination in her eyes. "I can't just sit here and pretend everything is normal," she whispered. "Everyone keeps talking about father choosing a new mate, like Elira doesn't even exist." "What are you thinking?" Ash asked, recognizing the familiar look of resolve on his sister's face. "I think it's time everyone knew the truth," Ren said firmly. Before Ash could respond or attempt to talk her out of whatever she was planning, Ren rose from her seat, her small figure suddenly commanding surprising attention, as conversation gradually quieted around the hall. Damien glanced toward his daughter with immediate concern, sensing something significant was about to unfold. "Ren," he said quietly, "sit down." But Ren, drawing on courage she didn't fully understand herself, continued standing, her voice carrying clearly across the now silent hall. "I'm sorry, father, but I can't stay quiet anymore. Everyone here is pretending that choosing a new mate for you is simple and straightforward, but it's not. Because you already have a mate. Our mother, Elira, who everyone believed was dead for the past 10 years, is actually alive, and she's been living right at the edge of our own territory this entire time." Gasps and murmurs rippled instantly through the gathered crowd, dignitaries exchanging shocked glances while servants paused mid-motion near the doorways. Charlotte Byrne's polished composure cracked slightly, confusion and surprise evident on her expression, while Isabel Moore simply stared, uncertain how to process such an unexpected revelation. "Ren," Damien said again, more urgently this time, though the words carried little authority given the shock still evident on his own face. Ash, seeing his sister standing alone amid the sudden chaos, rose from his seat as well, adding his voice to hers. "It's true. We found her months ago, without even knowing who she really was. She's our real mother, and we already love her. We don't want anyone else." The hall erupted into a flurry of hushed conversations, dignitaries turning toward each other with expressions ranging from disbelief to concern, while several members of the Elder Council exchanged uneasy glances, clearly caught off guard by the unexpected turn of events unfolding before the entire assembly. Damien rose slowly from his seat, raising a hand to quiet the gathering crowd, though his authority felt somewhat diminished given the personal nature of the revelation just made public. "This is a private family matter," he said carefully, "one that requires proper investigation before any conclusions can be drawn. But it's already been confirmed," Ren insisted, refusing to back down despite her father's obvious discomfort. "You saw her yourself, Father. You told us she's really our mother." The room fell into stunned silence once again, all eyes turning toward Damien, awaiting his response to his daughter's bold and unfiltered honesty. He glanced briefly toward Nathaniel Vale, whose expression had shifted from surprise to careful calculation, clearly already considering the political ramifications of such a public declaration. "It's true," Damien finally admitted, his voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "The woman my children speak of is indeed someone I once loved deeply. Someone I believed lost to me many years ago under circumstances that are currently under serious investigation." Charlotte Byrne rose slowly from her seat, her expression carefully neutral despite the obvious disappointment evident beneath her composed exterior. "Alpha King, if there are unresolved matters regarding your past, perhaps it would be wise to address them fully before proceeding further with tonight's proceedings." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall, dignitaries clearly uncertain how to proceed given the unexpected complexity now surrounding an event they had assumed would follow straightforward traditional protocols. Nathaniel Vale cleared his throat loudly, attempting to regain some semblance of order over the increasingly chaotic gathering. "Perhaps it would be best to pause tonight's proceedings," he suggested carefully, glancing toward Damien for confirmation. "Allow time for a proper investigation into these serious claims before continuing with any further ceremony arrangements." Damien nodded slowly, relief and apprehension mixing uneasily within him. "Yes, I believe that would be wise given tonight's unexpected revelations." As dignitaries began rising from their seats, murmuring quietly among themselves while servants moved to manage the sudden disruption, Damien turned toward his children, uncertain whether to feel proud of their courage or concerned about the chaos they had just unleashed across his entire territory. "We're sorry, Father," Ash said quietly, sensing the weight of what they had just done. "But we couldn't keep pretending anymore." Damien sighed heavily, placing a gentle hand on each of his children's shoulders. "I understand," he said finally. "Perhaps it's time the truth came fully into the light, regardless of how complicated that truth may prove to be." Across the hall, Nathaniel Vale watched the unfolding scene with narrowed eyes, already calculating how such a dramatic revelation might affect delicate political balances he had worked carefully to maintain. Beside him, another advisor, Edmund Graves, remained unusually quiet, his expression carefully guarded despite the obvious tension now gripping the entire assembly. Few in the room noticed the flicker of unease crossing Edmund's features, though it would soon become clear just how deeply connected he truly was to the very secrets now threatening to unravel after 10 long years of careful concealment. The morning after the disrupted welcoming dinner, Damien gathered his most trusted advisors within his private study, determined to uncover the full truth behind Alira's disappearance 10 years earlier. Oliver Finch stood near the door, arms crossed, while Nathaniel Vale sat across from Damien's desk, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious tension still lingering from the previous night's dramatic events. "I want a complete investigation into everything surrounding Alira's exile," Damien said firmly. "Every record, every witness statement, every decision made during that time period. Someone within our own pack orchestrated her removal, and I intend to discover exactly who was responsible." "I'll begin reviewing the archived records immediately," Nathaniel replied, "though given how many years have passed, I suspect some documentation may be incomplete or deliberately altered." "Then we'll speak directly with anyone who was present during that period," Damien said, "starting with those who held positions of influence at the time." Alira, sitting quietly in the corner of the study, spoke up carefully. "I remember specific details from that time that might help narrow the investigation. There was a private meeting called shortly before I was accused of betrayal, attended only by a handful of senior advisors. I was never permitted to know exactly who was present, though I always suspected someone close to Damien orchestrated the entire situation. Do you remember anything specific about that meeting? Oliver asked. Any details that might help identify who called it? Alira frowned, concentrating hard on memories she had spent years trying to forget entirely. I remember overhearing a conversation shortly before everything happened, between two advisors discussing concerns about my growing influence within the pack. One of them mentioned wanting to protect certain arrangements already in place, though I never understood exactly what he meant at the time. Do you remember their names? Damien asked, leaning forward intently. One voice I didn't recognize clearly, Alira admitted, but the other, I believe it may have been Edmund Graves. Damien's expression shifted immediately, surprise and suspicion flickering across his features. Edmund has served as my advisor for over a decade. He's been present at nearly every significant decision made within this pack, which would make him perfectly positioned to orchestrate exactly the kind of deception you're describing, Nathaniel pointed out carefully. Damien sat back in his chair, processing this new information with growing unease. Edmund Graves had always presented himself as a loyal and dedicated advisor, someone Damien had trusted implicitly for years. The idea that he might have been responsible for orchestrating Alira's exile, and the devastating lies that followed regarding their children's survival, felt almost impossible to accept. We need proof before making any accusations, Damien said finally. Nathaniel, quietly review any records from that period that Edmund may have had direct access to. Oliver, I want you keeping a close watch on his movements, though discreetly. I don't want him aware we're investigating him until we have concrete evidence. Over the following 2 days, the investigation proceeded carefully and quietly. Nathaniel discovered several inconsistencies within official records from 10 years earlier, including missing documentation regarding Alira's formal exile and unusual financial transactions that seemed to have occurred around the same time period. Meanwhile, Oliver observed Edmund growing increasingly anxious and distracted, spending unusual amounts of time reviewing old records within the pack archives. On the 3rd day, Nathaniel arrived at Damien's study with a triumphant, though grim, expression. I found something significant, he said, placing a weathered document on the desk before them. This is a payment record showing a substantial transfer of resources to a rogue pack territory, dated just days before Alira's exile was formally announced. The authorization signature belongs to Edmund Graves. Damien studied the document carefully, his jaw tightening with barely controlled anger. What would he have needed to pay a rogue pack for during that specific time period? Perhaps, Alira suggested quietly, to arrange my removal without raising suspicion. Rogue packs often assist with tasks that require discretion, especially matters involving forced relocation. There's more, Nathaniel continued. I also found correspondence suggesting Edmund had significant financial troubles around that same period, debts owed to several influential parties outside our territory. It's possible someone offered him substantial compensation in exchange for arranging your exile, Alira, though the exact motive remains unclear. Damien rose from his desk, anger evident in every line of his posture. Bring him to me. I want answers directly from Edmund himself. Within the hour, Edmund Graves stood before Damien's desk, his expression carefully composed despite the obvious tension evident in his stiff posture. Nathaniel and Oliver stood nearby, watching closely as Damien slid the incriminating document across the desk toward him. Care to explain this? Damien asked, his voice dangerously calm. Edmund's eyes flickered briefly toward the document before returning to Damien's face, his composure beginning to crack slightly around the edges. My alpha, I'm not certain what you're implying. This payment record, authorized under your signature, transferred significant resources to a rogue pack territory just days before Alira's exile was formally announced. I want to know exactly what that payment was for, and I want the truth this time, not more carefully constructed lies. Edmund's shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of years spent maintaining careful deception finally becoming too heavy to sustain any longer. My alpha, he began slowly, everything I did, I believed at the time was necessary to protect the stability of this pack. Protect the stability? Damien repeated, disbelief evident in his tone. By orchestrating the exile of my mate and allowing me to believe our children had died as infants? There were concerns, Edmund said carefully, about Alira's growing influence within certain political circles at the time. Concerns that her family's alliances might eventually shift power away from your direct control. I was approached by parties who convinced me that removing her from the situation would ultimately protect your position as alpha. And you never thought to bring these concerns directly to me? Damien demanded, his voice rising sharply. Instead, you fabricated an elaborate betrayal, forced her into exile, and lied to me for 10 years about the survival of my own children? Edmund remained silent, unable to offer any justification that might soften the severity of his actions. Elira watched the exchange quietly from the corner of the room, years of pain and confusion finally finding clarity through this painful confrontation unfolding before her. You will be brought before the Elder Council immediately, Damien said finally, his voice cold with barely restrained fury, where you will answer fully for everything you've done, and face whatever consequences the council deems appropriate. As guards were summoned to escort Edmund from the study, Damien turned toward Elira, his expression softening slightly despite the anger still evident beneath the surface. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I should have questioned things more carefully all those years ago. I should have trusted you completely, rather than believing the version of events presented to me. You couldn't have known, Elira replied gently, though tears glistened in her eyes. Edmund constructed an elaborate deception, one clearly designed to be convincing enough to withstand scrutiny. Regardless, Damien said, the truth is finally coming into the light, and I intend to make certain everyone understands exactly what happened, so that you and our children can finally reclaim the life that was so wrongfully stolen from all of us. The Elder Council convened within a large formal chamber the following morning, all 7 senior members seated behind a long curved table, their expressions grave as Edmund Graves stood before them, flanked by 2 guards. Word of the previous night's revelations had spread quickly throughout Blackthorn territory, and the chamber's public gallery had filled with concerned members of the pack eager to witness the proceedings firsthand. Damien sat at the head of the chamber, Elira seated quietly beside him, both twins present as well, sitting close to their parents with solemn expressions that reflected the gravity of the moment. Nathaniel Vale stood before the council, presenting the evidence gathered over the past several days with methodical precision. The documentation clearly shows a substantial payment authorized by Edmund Graves to a rogue pack territory, dated just days before the formal exile of Elira Hart, Nathaniel explained, holding up the weathered financial record for the council's inspection. Additional correspondence reveals Edmund's significant financial troubles during that same period, suggesting he was compensated by outside parties in exchange for orchestrating her removal. Beatrice Thorne, the eldest member of the council, studied the evidence carefully before turning her attention toward Edmund. Do you deny these allegations? Edmund remained silent for a long moment, his earlier composure completely abandoned, replaced instead by weary resignation. I do not deny them, he said finally, his voice barely audible within the quiet chamber. Everything presented is accurate. Murmurs rippled through the public gallery, though Beatrice raised a hand, quickly restoring silence throughout the chamber. Then explain to this council exactly why you chose to orchestrate such a devastating deception against your own Alpha King. Edmund took a deep breath before continuing, his shoulders slumping under the weight of 10 years of carefully maintained secrets finally being exposed. 10 years ago, I found myself deeply indebted to certain influential parties outside our territory, debts I had no reasonable means of repaying. I was approached by representatives who offered to clear these debts entirely, in exchange for a single task, removing Elira Hart from her position of growing influence within the pack. And what reason were you given for wanting her removed? Nathaniel asked. I was told her family's expanding alliances posed a potential threat to certain outside interests, Edmund explained. I convinced myself at the time that removing her would ultimately serve the greater stability of Blackthorn territory, though I understand now that reasoning was merely a convenient justification for actions driven primarily by my own desperate circumstances. And the children? Damien interjected sharply, unable to remain silent any longer. What reason could possibly justify telling me my own children had died, when in fact they survived and were separated entirely from their mother? Edmund's expression crumbled slightly under the weight of this particular question. That decision was made independently by the parties who arranged Elira's exile. I was told only that the children would be handled separately, and I chose not to question the details further, understanding on some level that ignorance would allow me to live with my actions more easily. The chamber fell into heavy silence following this admission, the full scope of Edmund's betrayal settling over everyone present. Wren, sitting quietly beside her father, felt Ash reach for her hand, both twins overwhelmed by the realization of just how close they had come to growing up entirely without their mother, due to nothing more than one man's desperate financial troubles. Beatrice Thorne conferred quietly with the other council members for several long minutes before addressing the chamber once again. Given the severity and clarity of these confessions, this council finds Edmund Graves guilty of orchestrating deception against the Alpha King, and causing significant, prolonged harm to Elira Hart and her children. He is hereby stripped of his advisory position and all associated privileges within Blackthorn territory, effective immediately. Edmund lowered his head, accepting the judgment without protest, understanding fully that his actions had earned whatever consequences the council deemed appropriate. Additionally, Beatrice continued, given the outside financial pressures that clearly influenced his decision-making, this council recommends further investigation into the parties who originally approached him, to ensure no lingering threats remain against this pack's stability or leadership. Nathaniel nodded firmly. I will personally oversee that continued investigation, Elder Thorne. As guards escorted Edmund from the chamber, murmurs of relief and quiet conversation rippled through the public gallery, many pack members visibly moved by the dramatic unfolding of truth after so many years of unknowing deception. Damien rose from his seat, turning toward Alira, with an expression of profound relief mixed with lingering sorrow over the years they had both lost. It's finally over, he said quietly. The truth is fully known now, to everyone. Alira nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, as she looked toward their children, both twins watching the proceedings with a mixture of exhaustion and cautious hope. 10 years of pain, finally given proper acknowledgement, she said softly. Though nothing can fully restore what was taken from us. No, Damien agreed, reaching for her hand gently. But we can build something new from here forward, together, without the shadow of these lies hanging over our family any longer. As the council chamber gradually emptied, whispers of the dramatic revelations spread quickly throughout the entire territory, reaching every corner of Blackthorn lands by evening. The mating ceremony, originally intended to formally introduce Damien to potential new mates from allied packs, suddenly carried an entirely different significance given the truth now fully exposed before the entire community. Nathaniel Vale approached Damien later that afternoon, his expression thoughtful as he considered the unusual circumstances now surrounding the previously scheduled ceremony. My Alpha, given everything that has come to light, the council will need to reconvene to discuss how best to proceed regarding the ceremony's original purpose. Damien nodded slowly, glancing toward Alira, who stood nearby watching their children play quietly in the garden outside the chamber windows. I believe the answer to that question has already become quite clear, Nathaniel, though I understand the council will need to formally address it through proper channels. I'll arrange for the council to reconvene tomorrow morning, Nathaniel confirmed. Given the significance of these revelations, I suspect they'll want to resolve the matter as quickly as possible. As evening settled over Blackthorn territory, Damien found himself standing quietly beside Alira near the garden, watching their children finally at peace after the whirlwind of revelations and confrontations from recent days. Whatever happens tomorrow, Alira said softly, I want you to know that simply having the truth acknowledged, and having our children finally together with both of us, already feels like more than I ever allowed myself to hope for these past 10 years. Damien squeezed her hand gently, watching Ren and Ash laughing together in the fading evening light. Tomorrow, we'll make certain the rest of the world understands exactly what our family deserves. Together, properly, and permanently this time. The Elder Council chamber filled once again the following morning, though the atmosphere felt markedly different from the tense proceedings of the previous day. Word had spread quickly throughout Blackthorn territory regarding Edmund Graves's confession, and most pack members now understood the full truth behind Alira's 10-year absence, and the devastating lies that had separated her from both her mate and her children. Beatrice Thorne called the session to order, her expression more measured and thoughtful than the stern demeanor she had displayed during Edmund's judgment. This council has convened to address the matter of the previously scheduled mating ceremony. Given the extraordinary circumstances that have come to light regarding Alpha King Damien Cross and Alira Hart. Nathaniel Vale rose to address the gathered council members in public gallery, his tone measured and diplomatic. As this council is now fully aware, Alira Hart was wrongfully exiled from Blackthorn territory 10 years ago, through deliberate deception orchestrated for personal financial gain. During that exile, she was falsely informed that her children had not survived, while Alpha King Cross was simultaneously deceived into believing both Alira and their children had perished. This grave injustice has only recently been uncovered and properly acknowledged. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the public gallery, many pack members nodding solemnly as Nathaniel continued his address. Given these circumstances, he continued, the original purpose of the mating ceremony, namely selecting a new mate for our Alpha King from among allied packs, no longer aligns with the true situation now facing our leadership. Alira Hart remains, by all rights and traditions, the rightful mate of Alpha King Cross, her status having been stolen from her through deception rather than any legitimate dissolution of their bond. Charlotte Byrne, seated among the visiting dignitaries who had traveled for the original ceremony, rose gracefully from her seat. If I may address the council, she said politely. While I understand the personal significance of these revelations, I would ask that proper tradition be respected regarding how such matters are formally resolved. Beatrice nodded toward her respectfully. Your concerns are noted and entirely reasonable, Lady Byrne. This council does not take such decisions lightly, nor do we wish to dismiss the traditions that have long guided our pack's governance. She turned her attention back toward the full chamber, addressing everyone present with careful deliberation. After thorough discussion among council members, we have reached a decision regarding this matter. Given that Alira Hart's exile occurred through fraudulent means rather than any legitimate severing of her bond with Alpha King Cross, this council formally recognizes that bond as having remained intact and legitimate throughout the past 10 years, despite the forced separation. A soft gasp rippled through portions of the gathered crowd, though most faces reflected quiet approval rather than surprise, given how thoroughly the truth had already spread throughout the territory overnight. Therefore, Beatrice continued, this council formally dissolves the previously scheduled mating ceremony in its original intended purpose. In its place, we recommend a ceremony be held reaffirming the bond between Alpha King Damian Cross and Alira Hart, formally restoring her position as Luna of Blackthorn territory, and properly recognizing Ren and Ash as the legitimate heirs of this union. Damian rose from his seat, relief and gratitude evident across his features as he glanced toward Alira, who sat with tears streaming freely down her face, overwhelmed by the formal acknowledgement finally restoring everything that had been so unjustly stolen from her. On behalf of my family, Damian said, addressing the full chamber with genuine emotion evident in his voice, I want to thank this council for their careful consideration of this matter, and for ultimately choosing truth and justice over rigid adherence to circumstances, built entirely upon deception. Isabel Moore, seated near Charlotte, leaned over and whispered something quietly, both women nodding in quiet acceptance of the council's decision. While disappointment likely lingered somewhere beneath their composed exteriors, both understood the extraordinary nature of the circumstances now properly addressed before them. Nathaniel Vale addressed the chamber once more. The formal reaffirmation ceremony will be scheduled for 3 days from now, allowing sufficient time for proper preparations befitting the occasion. All dignitaries currently visiting our territory are cordially invited to remain and witness this celebration, should they wish to do so. As the council session concluded and the chamber began emptying, Ren and Ash rushed toward their parents, both children practically vibrating with excitement over the formal resolution finally bringing their family together in a way that felt permanent and secure. Does this mean Alira really gets to be our official mother now? Ren asked, looking between her parents with hopeful anticipation. Yes, Damian said, kneeling down to meet his daughter's eyes directly. Officially, permanently, and properly recognized by our entire pack. Ash threw his arms around Alira's waist, burying his face against her side. I'm so glad you're really staying with us now. Alira wrapped her arms around both children, tears still glistening in her eyes as she looked up toward Damian, overwhelming gratitude evident in her expression. I never imagined I would have this chance again, she said softly. To be recognized properly, to raise our children openly, to stand beside you as your true mate rather than hiding at the edges of your world. Those days are finally behind us, Damian said, reaching down to gently touch her cheek. From here forward, our family stands together, fully and openly, exactly as it always should have. Outside the chamber, word of the council's decision spread rapidly throughout Blackthorn territory, pack members expressing genuine joy and relief over the resolution of what had quickly become one of the most emotionally significant events in recent memory. Preparations immediately began shifting from the original ceremony's purpose toward an entirely new celebration, one destined to properly honor a family finally reunited after 10 years of unjust separation. As evening approached, Damian stood once again beside Alira near the same garden where they had spent so many quiet moments over recent days, watching their children continue celebrating the joyful news with barely contained excitement. 3 days, Alira said softly, glancing toward Damian with a small, hopeful smile. 3 days, until everything becomes fully and permanently official. 3 days, Damian repeated, pulling her gently into an embrace. Until the world finally sees exactly what should have always been true. You, standing beside me, exactly where you belong. The great hall of Blackthorn territory had been transformed entirely over the past 3 days. Deep red and gold banners replaced now with soft white and silver decorations, symbolizing renewal and rightful restoration. Flowers lined every pathway leading toward the hall, their fragrance filling the crisp evening air as guests from allied packs gathered once again, this time for an entirely different purpose than originally intended. Ren stood near the entrance of the hall, dressed in a beautiful pale blue gown, watching nervously as guests continued arriving in steady numbers. Beside her, Ash adjusted his formal jacket for what felt like the 100th time, equally anxious about the significance of the evening ahead. "Do you think everything will go smoothly tonight?" Ren asked, glancing toward her brother. "It has to," Ash replied firmly. "After everything we've been through these past few weeks, tonight needs to be perfect." Inside the hall, final preparations continued, as musicians tuned their instruments, and servants placed the last decorative touches throughout the elegant space. Nathaniel Vale moved efficiently among the arriving guests, ensuring proper seating arrangements, while Beatrice Thorne oversaw the ceremonial preparations near the raised platform at the front of the hall. Alira stood in a private chamber adjacent to the Great Hall, her reflection catching in a tall mirror, as Agnes carefully adjusted the final details of her elegant silver gown. The dress had been specially prepared over the past 3 days, simple yet striking, reflecting both her quiet strength and the formal dignity befitting her restored position as Luna of Blackthorn territory. "You look absolutely radiant," Agnes said warmly, stepping back to admire the finished appearance. "I must admit, when I first followed those children into the forest, I never imagined the story would unfold quite like this." Alira smiled softly, gratitude evident in her expression. "Thank you, Agnes, for everything, including your concern that ultimately helped bring the truth into the light." A soft knock interrupted their conversation, and Damien entered the chamber, dressed in formal attire befitting the significance of the evening. He paused momentarily, taking in the sight of Alira standing before him, emotion evident in his expression as he crossed the room to join her. "You look absolutely beautiful," he said softly, taking her hands gently in his. "I still can hardly believe this is truly happening," Alira admitted, her voice trembling slightly with overwhelming emotion. "After everything we've endured, standing here now feels almost surreal." "Believe it," Damien said firmly, squeezing her hands reassuringly. "Because tonight, everything becomes permanent. No more hiding, no more uncertainty, just us, together, exactly as we should have always been." A gentle chime sounded from beyond the chamber, signaling that the ceremony was ready to formally begin. Damien offered his arm to Alira, and together they made their way toward the entrance of the Great Hall, where Ren and Ash waited eagerly to join their parents for the formal procession. As the large doors opened, revealing the elegantly decorated hall filled with gathered guests, a hushed silence fell over the entire assembly, followed quickly by warm applause as Damien and Alira began walking together down the center aisle, their children following closely behind them. Beatrice Thorne stood waiting at the raised platform, a formal document prepared before her as the family approached and took their positions before the assembled crowd. The applause gradually quieted, replaced by an atmosphere of reverent anticipation as the formal proceedings began. "Tonight," Beatrice announced, her voice carrying clearly across the silent hall, "we gather not to select a new mate for our Alpha King, as originally planned, but instead to formally and permanently restore a bond that should never have been broken. 10 years ago, through deception and injustice, Alira Hart was wrongfully separated from her true mate and her children. Tonight, that grave wrong is finally and fully corrected." She turned toward Damien and Alira, continuing the formal ceremony with practiced dignity. "Alpha King Damien Cross, do you formally and publicly reaffirm Alira Hart as your true and rightful mate, standing beside you as Luna of Blackthorn territory from this day forward?" "I do," Damien said firmly, his voice steady with unwavering conviction. "Now and always." "And Alira Hart," Beatrice continued, turning her attention toward Alira, "do you formally accept this restoration, standing beside Alpha King Cross as Luna of Blackthorn territory, embracing both your position and your responsibilities to this pack from this day forward?" "I do," Alira answered, her voice filled with quiet emotion that resonated throughout the silent hall. "With my whole heart, now and forever." Beatrice smiled warmly, closing the formal document before her. "Then by the authority granted to this council, I formally declare Alira Hart restored as Luna of Blackthorn territory, and Ren and Ash formally recognized as the legitimate heirs of Alpha King Damien Cross." The hall erupted into enthusiastic applause, guests rising from their seats to celebrate the joyful conclusion of a story that had captivated the entire territory over the past several weeks. Ren and Ash, standing proudly beside their parents, finally allowed themselves to fully celebrate the moment they had hoped for since first meeting Alira in her quiet cottage months earlier. "We did it," Ren whispered to Ash amid the celebratory applause. "We really brought our family together." Ash smiled widely, watching their parents embrace warmly before the entire assembled crowd. "We knew all along who our real mother was. We just had to help everyone else catch up to the truth." As the formal ceremony concluded and celebrations continued throughout the evening, Damien pulled Alira close, both of them watching their children finally free to openly celebrate the family they had fought so hard to reunite. 10 years of separation, Damien said softly, resting his forehead gently against hers, finally behind us. And a lifetime ahead of us, Alira replied, tears of joy glistening in her eyes as she glanced toward their children, together, exactly as we always should have been. Outside the great hall, the evening sky stretched clear and bright above Blackthorn territory, stars beginning to emerge as the celebration continued late into the night. Ren and Ash danced together near the edge of the hall, laughter echoing warmly through the crisp evening air, finally free from the secrecy and uncertainty that had shadowed their family for far too long. Their mother, once lost and forgotten, now stood proudly beside their father, exactly where she belonged. And for the first time in 10 years, the entire Blackthorn territory celebrated not division or tradition, but the simple, powerful truth that some bonds, no matter how deeply buried or unjustly broken, ultimately find their way back home.